A few years ago, I was helping a friend research and then make a documentary film on the subject of empathy. I used to live in the UK at the time. We had several interviews lined up, and one was with a historian named Theodore Zeldin. On the day of the interview, my job, besides driving from London to Oxford on a very foggy winter morning, was to sit very still at the foot of this charming man, holding the microphone while he was being filmed. Of all the words of wisdom that he said that day, there was one that really struck me, and that was about his initiative called Conversation Dinners, where strangers sit across the table and the menu, instead of food, lists topics of conversation from which you make a choice. I thought it was a profound idea, a wonderful social experiment to discourage strangers from slipping into small talk and have meaningful dialogue instead, thus promoting the understanding of different perspectives and with it, empathy. But actually, don't we find it easier to talk to strangers about difficult subjects than with people we know? Subjects that I call ones with the squirm factor. There are many such subjects, but today I have chosen 3: sex, death, and charitable giving, to illustrate why we need to have conversations about them rather than slip into uneasy silences. Let's take sex first. We're all products of it. We all enjoy it. We all have the urge for it. But how many of us find it easy to discuss about sex, even with the person we're making love to? And I'm not talking about bragging here or changing room conversation between men. I guess some of it has to do with conditioning. As a teenager going to college, I used to live with my family in Kolkata under my mother's guidance, but my father's jurisdiction. He made all the rules. There was one rule about the time of day that I must return home and stay there. These discussions usually happened on the dining table over a meal. And yes, I have to confess, I had a boyfriend at the time, my father's greatest concern. One Sunday lunch, as usual, he launched into one of his illogical discourses behind the reasoning about him trying to impose a curfew. And he got fed up with my counterpoints about his illogical idea of curtailing my liberties. And he finally said, "Look, Sara, I just want you to return home by sundown every day." Hello? What about the fact that the sun sets at 4:30 in the winter and about 7 p.m. in the summer? Or that all my amateur theatre rehearsals took place in the evening? That held no weight with my father. It was when I deliberately said, "But Baba, what can I do after sundown that I can't do before?" He squirmed. End of conversation. Oh my God, was his teenage daughter indirectly referring to sex? Instead of voicing his worry about the fact that his daughter might be having a physical relationship with her boyfriend, he clammed up. All I got was silence. Another conversation killer is death. And I'm speaking from personal experience here and of those I have spoken to. I lost my husband to cancer in 2004, 3 years after diagnosis. I used to work for a large media company in London at the time. All my colleagues were extremely supportive right throughout Peter's illness. They felt my pain. But a month after his passing, when I returned to work, it was difficult for me, yes, but also for my colleagues. They had this elephant in the room that they had to deal with, and no office manual tells you how. Most of the women were okay. They came up to me and said how sorry they were and gave me a hug. But the majority of the men found it difficult. They avoided eye contact or pretended as though nothing had happened. When one brave soul came up to me and asked how I was, and I said, "Not great," he squirmed. His polite but perfunctory query about how I was got an honest response from me, but not one that he was prepared for. What should he say now? What if I burst into tears? Since then, I've learned to live with the reality of putting others at ease about my loss. Every so often, in social situations, I get asked, "So what does your husband do?" And I try to make light of the situation, as Peter would have wanted, and say, "He keeps an eye on us from up there." Squirm. The conversation comes to an awkward halt, till I put them at ease and say, "Hey, it's okay. Death happens. It's a part of life." I try not to give them grief, as it were. The same unease exists in the world of charity too. I have encountered the squirm factor over and over again in the context of giving since I founded Small Change in 2013. Small Change is an online donation platform, but what we are really trying to do is raise the bar of awareness of what NGOs in India do to help the disadvantaged. The reasoning is, if no one knows what an NGO does and how they change lives and how they contribute to India's social development, why would anybody support them? The belief is that once there is this understanding, then the apathy, the widespread apathy towards those struggling against the tide of poverty will slowly change to empathy. We want apathy to change to empathy because apathy can't change the world, can it? But empathy possibly can. And this deep apathy across generations towards those less fortunate is possibly why the subject of giving is such an uncomfortable one in people's drawing rooms, between friends, between relatives, between the one who asks the other to give. When the Small Change platform launched in 2016, after a whole year of development and deliberating, the team thought, "Oh, we'll just ask all our friends and relatives to donate to one of our independently certified NGOs." We had 12 at the time. In the first month, we got 17 donations. 5 of them were tests from developers. In the second month, we got 6. We felt like complete failures and very isolated. But a recent report that came out this year on individual giving indicates that the lack of individual donors is not our failure alone, it is endemic. Everyday giving from people like you and me, not ultra and high net worth individuals, contributes to a mere 6% of philanthropic funding to social development in India, compared to 61% in the US and 10% in China. Considering the depth of our problems and how widespread that they are, this really is surprising. But perhaps the squirm factor around giving and the human behavior that triggers it might give us some clues. With one friend, small change, which she associated with me asking for a donation, became an issue. During our regular chats on the phone, she would never ask me how small change was doing, and that really hurt me. It was like her not asking me how my child is. It took me a whole year to broach the subject and clear the air. One NGO told us to call someone and ask them for funds feels like begging. Another said, I find it awkward because when I ask someone to donate and they don't, I feel they actually don't want to give, and then I can't ask again. And then they avoid the subject or me. It is like when you stop at a traffic light and an emaciated woman with a child in arms puts her hand out, and you roll up the window, look straight ahead till the light turns green. We've all done this. It is as though this apathetic response to in-your-face, inescapable poverty has been transferred to the NGO, the spokesperson for the downtrodden. It really is absurd that the subject of giving should cause such consternation between friends in our own social circles. One dear friend who admires what I do but has never donated on small change or even browsed the website. She said to me one day, but Sara, how do I know that the money is going to the right place? Have I so failed? That made me squirm. Have we so failed to build trust? Another friend said she espouses the culture of giving on social media and encourages all her followers to donate to Small Change to one of our fundraising campaigns, but has never done so herself. She doesn't practice what she preaches. And face to face, between us, the subject of giving remains in our hearts and minds. It is never up for discussion. In an article authored by 2 academics from the London School of Economics, they say there is considerable evidence to say that giving or helpful behavior is prompted by emotions like empathy, sympathy, and compassion. But their paper, which was an outcome of a behavioral experiment that they conducted, was interestingly titled Reluctant Altruism and Peer Pressure in Charitable Giving, because they found that peer pressure created a disinclination to give, and those that gave into peer pressure, and a lot of people do, they were less happy about their donation than those that gave out of their own volition, driven by empathy. This, to me, goes a long way to explain the squirm factor around giving and why it causes people such consternation when you ask someone to donate within your own social circles. Then I would argue that pure altruism can only be triggered by empathy. And for real empathy, we need to have deep understanding of the other. So when everyday subjects like sex, death, and charitable giving causes such disquiet between people, it creates barriers to that understanding, barriers that can only be broken by conversations, by discussion, by debate, not silence. So let's get bolder about having these conversations and take Theodore Zeldin's eccentric but brilliant idea of conversation dinners into our homes, into our classrooms, into our offices, into meetings, into different social spaces. And let's talk about what we don't talk about. Because, as Zeldin says, conversation changes the way you see the world and even changes the world. Thank you.